Hey, this is Philip at thebest3d.com, and I wanted to follow up on some of these discussions we've had on the Steam forum regarding planets and planetary scenes, space scenes, and especially with the spherize tool, and kind of explore some of the tricks and techniques that might be useful if you want to create something like this scene here. This has a background, this has a couple of planets. They're all exactly the same planet, actually, one spherized object, but we want to give them different appearance, different saturation, color, rotation, size, and just give it a little bit of a depth ordering that way. No layers were used here. This is all done through custom brush. And I wanted to just show you some of the techniques to do that, right? So we have a background image. In fact, I'll show you right from the beginning how to do that as well. And then I'll go into selecting, doing the spherize, and then selecting the mask for that. There's a couple of tricks, a couple of gotchas, a couple of glitches, things to work around it. So let's go minimize these custom brushes that we have here. That's a good thing too, by the way. When you work with custom brushes, you may want to have exposed the various controls here to make them smaller. Let's see if I show PRV for preview, you can see the size here. That stored copy has the original size, but you can, the moment you use this here, it loads a smaller or a bigger version based on these sliders. So the currently or active loaded custom brush is immediately updated based on saturation changes, based on hue. So it gives it a little bit more of a pink or reddish or green look, and there's a variety of other options there that might be useful. So anyway, we'll get into that. Let's start from the beginning, which is how to create this. Let me turn the preview of the custom brush off. And how to create something like this background scene in the first place. So first thing is perhaps to go to the render plasma noise, and one thing that you have by default is the two-tone mode. What I like to use, and you have probably some colors or black and white, something like this. But one thing that I like a lot is the HSV mode, hue saturation value. Now, I'm not going to leave it like this. This is a little bit too rich in color, but I want to change that into a grayscale. So I'm going to go turn that into image. And it's not a bad idea to store this current image if you ever feel like you need to get back to that. That should be part of your workflow. Just often store it and preferably even save it, right? Either save it into the clipboard or save it into a file. But if you're in a hurry, you don't have time, or you want to just experiment, just at least store it. And then so next thing we'll do in the image menu is to go to grayscale and either take one of the presets here, average or video weighted, and I like the expose through this lens because that gives you some additional controls. And now here is where it nicely gives you some dark matter or some brighter glowing, some nice areas here to work with. Like the Horsehead Nebula has some contrasting areas, and so that's definitely one I will store and probably save, just not today. And I'm sure I'll regret it. But there's also another thing you can do here now at this point is perhaps work with the hue saturation value. Actually, not this one necessarily, just the value has some great additional controls here if you need it to be a little bit dimmer, or even increase the contrast a little bit, something like this. Then it already has, this has the making of a nice background cloudy nebula scene. Now sometimes you want it to be more of a glowing red or glowing blue, so what you could do, first of all, again, store this. Let's go image, store. And the next thing I would do perhaps is to map that against a gradient that is going from black to blue. All right, so we have in the view menu, we have this P, shortcut P for the sweep editor. Why P? Well, probably it's playtime because it's a very playful tool here. And so if you look at some of the gradients, in fact, let's go to this one here, loading the default gradient sets. there's 8 gradients to each set. This one by default goes from black to white, but we can find another one like this. And what I'll do is I'll remap the colors. Dark will go on the left side, bright will go on the right side. All right, so we'll get basically the same layout remapped through these reddish colors. So you do that here with filter, color, map to current gradient. Right, and so that can be interesting. Sometimes you want the inverse object, the inverse mapping, so you can just switch it and get a different result. But this is a good start. And now we say, well, okay, let's store this, but we really wanted kind of a bluish tint. And so that's something that you could do in a couple of ways. One of them is to simply use the color menu and swap the channels or roll the channels, right? So sometimes that'll be a good way to get into the blue zone. And I think that's what I did for this image that I used or that I showed earlier. So store image copy, we have our background image. Right now we might want to add some stars, we might want to paint. This is a paint program after all, let's not forget that. You can right click on the brush here in the brush tool and you'll see simple dots will suffice to make it look like stars. Effects also has, or let's see, organic effects has a starry appearance, and so that's a little bit too dense, but you could certainly use that perhaps with a little bit a bigger stepping distance to add a little bit of this. Also opacity, perhaps a little bit more intense, and then you might want to put it into additive mode. Where is it? Right here. Oh, it already is, right? So that way when you keep painting over it, it keeps getting brighter and brighter when it hits one that's already there. Right, so you can create clusters and you can create just sprinkles of stars. This is where you can also change the size and make just a great amount of very small stars and even more of them. So make don't hesitate to make a good set of really small stars here all over, because there are really, when you look at space scenes, there are billions and trillions and gazillions of stars all over. So no matter how much you zoom in and look in through Hubble Space Telescope, you'll always see some more stuff there, and then you start seeing galaxies and other really marvelous stuff up in the heavens. So where my first cat is resting now. Hello, Mishki. So the next thing what we'll do is we'll store this one. This will be our background image, and you can always spend some more time adding some soft contrast improvement, perhaps reducing the intensity of it just a little bit is nice. Perhaps add some light diffusion as well, especially the bright parts. They seem to be bleeding into the dark, and then sometimes a more ghostly look with the dark diffusion. So lots of different ways to play with that. And then also when you apply a filter, sometimes you like the basics of it. Let's say the light diffusion, and you go to the dark diffusion. You like it in essence, but it's a little bit too much of it. So don't forget that you have this thing called interactive undo or fade last action, right? This one goes from left to right, and you can restore the prior image, or you can go here with this option. Interactive undo does the same thing, it's just mapped the other way. It goes from right to left to restore the prior image, and you have a whole range of phases in between where it's just not that intense. And that's a good way to also create very faint stars. In addition to a couple of bright ones, you may want a whole bunch of them that are very faint. Simply do the fade last action, right? Interactive undo. All right, so this is our star. This is our background image, and this is similar to what I had done here. Now here I had added some glows as well, or some let's see, what's this tool here, this one here. With the right click here, you'll see linear, gradient tool, circular, and so on. There's nova, right? So with the nova you get nova options, and I think default is 8 or 6, and some medium bloom. And so whenever you see some bright spots here, you can put a little bit of that. Now the color of this nova will depend on your primary color, so be sure that you don't use that in black. It's not going to look very impressive. But you can use yellow and red, or you can click these colors here to choose a different color. Magenta looks great usually on stuff like that. Yellow also, and then you can put a little bit of that, and you see it's not highly intense in terms of saturation. It's not very strong. But anyway, so that's some of the ideas. I'm going to go undo that in this case now. And I'm going to actually use this. The next thing is we need to create our planet, right? Something like this here. And we'll do that with the spherize tool. So what I'll actually do is I'll use the same image to build our planet. Now, not because it makes sense, it's simply because I can. You may have totally different images. You may want to create another plasma noise, or maybe some bumpy noise, or cold lava, anything like that. It's a great idea for planets as well, right? For planet surfaces, something like this, and then go and spherize it. Where is it? Transform, spherize, and you have the starts of a planet. I'm going to go the silly way. I'm going to go with my image that's in the background, and I have some stars there. Which one do I like better? Yeah, let's use this one. And I'm going to say, let's make that also the surface of our planet. So I'm going to go right here into transform, spherize. All right. And so now here is a couple of things we may want to add. Some texturing, right? So there's the bump texture. You need to go through each of those to see what they do. Some of them will do some fractal glow, fractal noise, but you won't see it unless you have the hardness reduced here, the distance at a reasonable far distance. All sorts of other parameters can affect whether you see it or not, right? So here the type of light, I think default is a point light. Maybe the directional lights is better, but that may also not be the type of lighting you want. So grab you got two light sources here. You have one here, and you see how the specular reflection here moves with it. And so if your scene is going to need a planet which is barely lit just from the side, make sure you move this light out to the Goonies. And I think I must have lost it here. So don't do that. But you can certainly I don't know if you can reset that. Let's go cancel and re-enter that. That might be a glitch. Let's see, spherize. Oh no, it brings it back. Whew, save the day. All right, so we can grab this light and then perhaps try some others other than fractal noise, anodized noise. Well, that affects the surface and the coloring. There's also some ambient light. This light. So you have these two lights here. This one here perhaps will make that the red giant, and then this one here a bit more of a bluish glow, fairly dim. But there's also a general ambient light, and there is a sort of an atmospheric glow, although it's not complete because it's just on the inside of the planet. The atmospheric glow really should also be added, fading away in a circular gradient. Here in the spherize tool, what we'll do is let's try one that's going to be used mostly for something like a moon. So not much of an atmosphere, not much of blue glow. Ambient, we can do a little bit, but really I think what's going to be more important is what type of bump do we have here. So you want to have the surface look like a planet. There are 2 or 3 that are really going to be useful here. The stucco, not so much, but I think the terrain. Yeah, the terrain is going to be interesting. Mostly flat and then a couple of bumps. And then so here you can change the amount of that. And then you can also change point fall off, and give it some sort of a planety look here. Reduce the ambient. Let's see what else. Distance. That affects the distance of both light sources. Specular. Texture scale. Yeah, don't make it too small here. Don't make it too big either. Maybe in the future we'll have it actually take the color itself, the image, the original image, and use that as a texture map. Right now the two are not tied together. Anyway, so we have this one here. Perhaps I'll reduce the second light to next to nothing. And in fact, if you had it really at nothing and no ambient light, it would be all black. So that would make it difficult to choose and make a selection of the planet against the background. Because remember, one of the next steps, we want to make the background transparent. We want to identify just the planet. And we'll probably do that by selecting the background first and then inverting that selection. All right, so what we'll do is we'll give it just a little bit here because it helps in the selection, or because we need to, right? Because we actually still do want a little bit of another light source, another star shining on this as well. So let's say we go with something like that. All right, okay that. And so at this point, we're going to try to get to a selection mask similar to what I have here. Right, this one was stored earlier. And one of the ways to do that, of course, would be to use the selection tool, rectangle or oval, ellipse to alpha. Right, but the challenge with this is that even if you zoom in, you have to really know where exactly is that center. And then you try to get it, and you probably miss. See how at the bottom a little bit off. Now you could use the control key and shift this down. You can, with the control key down, you can transform or shift the selection, but you're probably still a bit too small. Sometimes something that can help is down here on the sidebar, which may be on the left side for you. In the sidebar at the bottom, below even the layers, there is this thing here called the grids. And one thing you would do here is enable the artist guides. It's difficult to see though. Black lines on really dark, it might be difficult to see, but if you're lucky, you have a sort of a brighter spot here, and you may be able to see exactly where that center is. So as you do your selection with ellipse, you know you start at least in the middle, or close enough, and then it's just a matter of making sure you don't miss too much of that planet. Still, it's not a very clean, easy way to do a perfect spherical or circular selection. Another way that I would try really is, if the background is uniquely dark and black, in this case, different from, let's turn this artist guide off. If the background is different from anything else on the planet here, I would simply use the magic wand. Right? With the magic wand, you can click the background, and that selects it. Now, if you have too much tolerance, in this case I gave it 1 level of tolerance and anti-aliasing, let's go back to 0. Right? This is the default setting. That should be it. But there are, unfortunately, in my planet here, some areas which are also dark and black at the same level as the backgrounds. And if it finds a gap here, it may be able to go in and choose that. So you got to be prepared to perhaps clean up some of the mess here. Right, now you notice also that it shows a bit of a tint that's pink here. That's because I have selection overlay alpha enabled. If I turn that off, you'll still see it at its original color. But this is good to also help you understand what is actually selected and what is not. In my current setting, not selected means it turns it pink. It multiplies to pink. Now black will not turn much pink because it's still black. But one thing you do want to do is see, okay, what's that selection? If you can store this alpha, you can see indeed that there are some parts that are selected which really should not, because we're selecting the background. Later we'll invert it, right? We can do that here. So here we have some parts that are not selected which really should. So how to fix that? What I'll do is simply paint that selection, right? You can go to the paint tool here, and you can go and paint on alpha, maybe with a hard brush, right? And the hard brush allows you to paint right on there. Now that's doing the wrong way. Let's use the right button. It doesn't matter what color they are. Left or right button is all it wants. And you could even have white here on this one as well. It's not going to make a difference. Right button will remove from the selection when you paint on alpha, and left button will add to the selection. Right, so right button to remove all this, and this is where you'll want to use the shift and the control key to pan around, the right button to zoom in, and then again right button to, without this zoom and shift, to erase the selected parts here, so that you can safely call this an area that's not selected. And every once in a while, grab a copy of that, store it. Because you will occasionally you'll have, you'll do something that causes the current selection to be lost. Now you can always do an undo, right? If you accidentally do something like this here, Control D, and oh, my selection's gone, just do an undo and it goes back to the prior steps. But it can at times be a little bit irritating if you have to select or go back. It's good to have a backup or a snapshot, right? So selection, store alpha. That way you see what's left to select here, right? So that's one thing. Sometimes you need to go in and paint away those selected parts. And then also, it may not look like a perfect circular selection, but you know what? Don't sweat it. Life's too short. And the planet is not perfect either. There are, after all, look at all these bumps we have here. Wouldn't you expect this not to be a perfect circle, but actually have a couple of bumps along the horizon, along the edge? Sure, right? So it's okay if it's not perfect. And by the way, it'll be so small you probably won't notice. Now, one thing you do notice is that there is an alpha selection along the edge here. And that can happen in a couple of ways, especially perhaps more so when you do the selection with the anti-aliased enable. All right, so when you select it that way, and let me go back to this planet here. This one did not have, let's go and Control D. This planet here had colors that were non-black, so I was able to do a selection here and select all that. But you see that it has a little bit of a marching ants along the edges. All right, so there's a glitch there. Well, it's an anti-aliasing mode, right? If I don't do the anti-aliasing, it shows everything around here. Let's go here. Let's go Control the clear selection. There you go. All right, so I'm going to go selection store alpha just to see what the current selection is. Right now, everything is selected. Get the magic wand, select out here. Right now, I have tolerance 0 and no anti-aliasing. But it still grabs something here. Well, the thing is, it won't matter so much. If you grab this, get alpha, all right, and then invert it and put that back in. Now you see the marching ants are on this line still, but here it's just left over, and it's not actually showing a selection here anymore. So if you move this around, it should get rid of that. It should clear it out. It's just a matter of not having erased it in what you see. But if you still see that, and especially if you have anti-aliasing enabled, you probably will, right? If you select on the outside, okay, hold on, Control D. If you select on the outside and then invert it, so you do a selection, here's another place where you can do that, invert alpha. Now you see the marching ants all over on the outside. And you know the sphere, the selection is correct now, because if you get alpha, you store it, you see it here, but you notice there's also this little bit of a selection, this white band here. And so when you work with the brush, one thing that you could do, you'd be tempted if you want to take a shortcut to simply say brush, use the selected as brush, right? Use selected as brush. And that's the right thing to do, except that you will also pick this outside border. Right. And so if you use this as a brush and then store it from the brush menu here, store and manage, you'll notice that the thumbnail has quite a bit of margin around it. It didn't grab just the sphere, the circular shape. It grabbed everything because it also found some selected pixels along the edge. When that happens, you need to first either clear that selection on the outside, erase that, and there's a couple of different ways to do that. Or you need to go in with this tool here, the custom brush selector tool, to actually manually select. This is what I call, if you want it done right, you've got to do it yourself. Right? That's a very wise man's saying words or something. Let's go and step back to where we have the selection and simply use that tool here, the custom brush selector tool, to select roughly here. You know, give it a little bit of margin. Keep an eye on this area and on this area here, right? So you want your cursor lines to come close, but not too close. All right, and then click and drag and make about a similar selection here. All right. So now I have that in the custom brush, and now I can store that. And you know that this one is now a better fit, a nice circular selection. It may not be 100% exactly centered because I did this manually, but if you zoom in and do that at at full screen size, the error, if there is any, will be so minimal that by the time you use this planet image, perhaps zoomed down, even scaled down, it's not going to be that noticeable. But you can certainly, the nice thing now you can do is you can give it a different hue. You can, first of all, also one thing you'll do is you browse for media, put it in a media browser. Right? It's create a category, my planets or my space objects or something like that. My custom brushes, I have just one or two here. Create a new category there, create folder, and I'm going to call this my planets. Why my planets and why not just planets? Well, because if you ever install a different version of Howler somewhere else, or Dogwaffle, or you just want to go to these files, it's a little bit easier to find them all, the ones that you created, if they are in your own category. My something is a good way to identify that. Okay, so we have this category, and then we'll just save this one. This is blue planet. All right, so we have blue planet, and we'll probably have a few, so let's call this one 01. All right, so now that means we can quite easily get back to this simply by clicking this and then going to store. All right, so that will restore a saved copy. I'm going to close the others here. And what I want to do is just take a look at some of the other things you want to do once you have a stored custom brush. And first of all, you want to see it. So click the preview so that you can see it. And you can see that it's doing a pretty good job. We still have the selection mask. Let's go close that. And so now you can paint here. Right? You can stamp it down. Let's position our image there a little bit. You can go and stamp it down, single click, or just drag it around. And things you might want to do is make them smaller. So use this scale tool in the stored copy, and you'll have a smaller copy. Right button to erase to the background color, to the secondary color essentially. There you go. Single click with the left button or drag around. Make it even smaller. Right? Very small. There you go. And then you also have, you can make some of them bigger than the original. And let's say you want to also give the rotation a little bit of change. So now here you can see the preview. As you rotate it, you can see which way this thing, this lit spot, the lit area, the specular highlight is going to be facing. So if you want to composite a scene in which there is a big bright star in the middle and there is a planet over here, you want that specular highlight, that reflection, to show over here this way. Right, and then maybe you have a different color. Let's see, hue, saturation, value, a different color for the next planet. Let's give it a bit more of a greenish or more of a reddish tint, or orangey earth colors, something like that, but also not that saturated. So let's go click outside of that slider, and then hue, saturation, value. Saturation, let's reduce the saturation to something almost like grayish. All right. So now you have something like more like this. But you want that planet or that moon to be kind of right down here below. So we need to turn it so that the specular reflection is appearing a bit more on the upper side. Right. So there you go. Oh, we need it to be smaller also. So let's undo that. This is going to be a moon. So let's make it a little bit smaller. And there you go. So that's basically the idea, is that you work from this one stored copy of the brush with transparent background. And now, of course, let's go back to that original background. Maybe this one, or this one here. Let's grab this one and put a couple of them together. Right? So we'll have, let's reset it all here. There's a reset that go back to the original. Let's not paint that one yet. Let's first do a couple of small ones. So, and I mean really small ones. And by the way, you can resize it in other places too. You can, whatever, this is a stored copy you're resizing, and it loads at this new size. It loads as the custom brush that you're currently using, the loaded custom brush. But you can also work on the loaded custom brush here from the brush menu and resample that and see how small it is right now, and you can make that even smaller. So let's say we want this one here, and we'll store this one, right? We can have another stored copy, and this one we have perhaps a need to make it a little bit less saturated, a little bit more of a planety look, of a moon look, and a little bit more on, let's see, hue, saturation, value, a little bit brighter, something like that, but also a little bit more on, I don't know, a reddish or earth colorish or yellowish tint. Something like that. All right, so this planet we'll put here. Oh, sometimes the first click doesn't take. There's the second one. Okay, then we'll need another one that's a little bit bigger, and that one will be something like this. And we'll need it also at a slightly different, actually let's make it bigger like this, and then we'll need it also at a different hue. A bit more saturated and a different hue. A bit less saturated. This looks like Amazon forest growing all over here. Well, why not? Let's get this one a chance. And then let's go back to the this one here and reset that one to full size. And again, this is one that, but maybe we don't need it that big, but we do need it at a different orientation because we're going to have it right around here. All right. And the planet, I mean, there's going to be a big bright star somewhere around here. So now there is one more planet we want, and that will be perhaps a really big one. And we needed something like this here. Okay, now here's an interesting one. It's too big for me to move the cursor out. So use the Shift and Control key and then drag this thing out of sight so you have enough room to go there and place it where you want it. Make your workspace adapt to your needs. And let's say we go something like this. So we have a partial overlap there, and it looks a bit like one hiding another. So I don't know what composition you will have in your scene, but you can probably see a couple of ways to work with this now. I'll do just one more here. Let's see, hue saturation. I want saturation all the way down to a grayish almost, really a dead moon look. And we'll have it darker also. Hue saturation value dark. This is going to be a dark moon. Okay, and then rotate a little bit. Something like this, or do we want it here? I don't know. There's so many different places where we need moons. Let's go like this. All right. So now this is definitely an image we'll want to store and save. I'm just going to be lazy and store it only. But the next thing we'll need to do is finish this up with a couple of other things. We could do, for instance, if we wanted to make it look like we're in an area with a lot of nebulous gas in space, not totally empty vacuum, but a little bit of nebulous gas. One thing that helps is to add a bit of zoom blur, or where is it? The Mystic Vision there. Mystic Vision. Right. With Mystic Vision, imagine if you have a planet or a light source here somewhere, which we have yet to define. But one thing you can do is you can set the quality, the factor, and make it dark, actually. Make it the scary dark. So it kind of casts some, almost looks like volumetric shadows. And that will be particularly areas. See here, for instance, on the planet, on this little planet, you'll see a little bit of a almost like a volumetric shadow drag here, and then you can add that, but also again, if it's too intense, you can add you can reduce the intensity. Just have a little hint of that. Sometimes it really does not take a lot. Let's go and turn the preview of the brush off and see something else. I'm going to undo this and instead actually add my light source. The big bright star is going to be one of the let's see, what do we have? We have the nova, lens flares. Of course, there's going to be one for lens flares. In fact, we probably want to use several places where a lens flare will show. Some of them really faint, but still noticeable. So let's go with this bluish one here. All right. So we'll have a couple of lens flares here, even in areas where there are no big bright nebula yet. And sometimes it helps to actually see them at a different color. So give a couple of reddish ones too. It's not everything is a blue dwarf star. Now we also want to have one that's pretty bright. All right, so this one has a little bit of a too strong of a reflection on the lens reflection. I'm going to try perhaps this one or this one. This number 3 from the bottom left. That's pretty much my favorite for many of these space scenes. But the thing too is you can combine with another. Now take one or two together at times. This might be too bright, definitely is. But if you do an animation where this thing explodes, why not? Huh? All right, let's finish it exactly with that. I'm gonna go store this image. Store image copy. And again, I'm gonna be lazy and not actually save it. But I'm gonna go back to just this one lens flare. If I store, okay, this is gone. I want to keep this, so I know where the exploding lens flare is going to go, right on top of that. Right, and now I create an animation, and I'm going to go with, let's say we want to create 90. This is going to be a quick animation, 150 frames, to do a 5-second long animation, and playing at 30 frames a second. Right. So let's go to the timeline. And in fact, this animation might be needed again and again for different tests. So I'm going to go to animate, store animation to disk. All right, so we have a quick snapshot of this animation. That even if the program crashes, the snapshot is still in existence, and you can actually recover it. It's a DWA file, dog waffle animation file. This brush we don't need anymore. I'm going to at least minimize it, maybe even get rid of it. There's a couple of others here from prior tests. I'm going to close those. So where is it? There it is. There's the DWA of our stored animation, and we can restore it from that. Now I'm going to add a bit of a explosive flare on this. So I'm going to go to the filters inside the timeline, and at the bottom there's a lens flare, and then I can show the flare settings. So here we have the same lens flares that we saw earlier from this tool here, and I'm gonna go grab this one here with the big green streaks and place it right over here. Right? Sometimes the easier way is not to drag it on top, but simply be on the side and then just place the click here. There. Click it so you know it's right there. And then all you need to do really is change the intensity of it. So you can start with next to nothing, right? And perhaps for much of the scene, all the way to about half of the timeline here, it's still the same. And then suddenly there's a big bright, oh, actually a little bit of a burst. And then it comes back down like nothing happened. Just trying to scare you. So this one goes a little bit here, and then it comes back down. All right, keep another keyframe here, and now suddenly here we have a big boom, big blast. Right, and then that will gradually fade away. All right, that was the photonic blast. All right, so let's apply that. And soon enough we have our animation, and we may want to even animate this, meaning move the camera into it, like gradually zoom in. Unfortunately, this is not going to be zooming in this close planet faster than this one. Right? This is not a 3D scene anymore. In a perfect 3D environment, we would actually have the ability to move this planet here on the right side, this planet, a little bit faster out of the scene. Now you can actually simulate that with the brush keyframer, but you would have to do that before you start zooming in. You can make movements of the brush with the brush keyframer that you see here. Right? Essentially, you do this, and you would grab the brush that you currently have, the custom brush, and you would say, okay, I want you to be big, and I want you to move gradually from here to out, as I'm also going to change the rest of the animation later on. But in this case, I'll just do another transform with the timeline editor. Before I do that, once again, I'm going to store this animation, because I have this animation, I haven't stored it yet or saved it, so I want to at least have a snapshot stored to disk. And that way I have one DWA without the blast and another one with the blast coming up here. All right, so this one here has no blast, this one does have a blast. And now I'm going to have another blast. Now I'm going to zoom into that very quickly, just doing a little bit of a transform, looking for the transform group, which is usually 3 clicks down on the scroll bar, right? If you start here and you have the scroll bar at the top, 1, 2, 3 clicks, you're in the transform group. That's where the 3D designer is and some other great tools for 3D. I'm going to go to the transform, right? And with the transform, you can move it around, but it does not replicate. So you got, if you want to move a little bit, you got to have it bigger than the original. You got to scale it up a little bit so you have actually some margin to move. What I'm going to do is reset and then simply start from here and softly zoom in. So beginning frame, you can, by the way, make this bigger if you want a bit more detail here. So you can go to the very first frame and keyframe that, and then go to the very last frame and just scale up a little bit. Right? Or maybe you'll want to have that scale at about this level, just a little bit. Right? Scale here. And then here we'll continue to scale, but we'll also slightly rotate. Okay, so continue to scale and slightly rotate, something like this. It does not take a lot. You don't really need to overdo that, but it's great to have this little bit of transformation going. So there you go. We have a 5-second animation like this. And that one, I think, calls the end of this tutorial. Thanks for watching. Let's go make sure we save all this. Depending on how you're going to integrate that into your game or into your video or whatever you do with it next, you'll want to store it to disk, so you have a quick snapshot. You can save it directly as a DWA, which only Dogwaffle understands, but it's a quick memory dump. So you can save it here to a DWA file, or you can also save it to an AVI with your chosen codec. I would recommend Lagarif if you still intend to work on this. Lagarif is free, it's a fast compressor and a pretty small file size, not as small as Xvid usually, but or DivX, but it does give you, Lagarif gives you nice lossless compression. So it's lossless, and that means it's not lossy. So you can still reload that AVI and all pixels are the same as they were before. And so as long as you work with it, or if you want to get better results, try Lagarif. So when you save this as an AVI, what I usually do is I select the folder, and I'm going to skip that in this case, but I'm going to go and say save AVI, and I don't have an infinite amount of disk space, so I'm not going to keep it at full frames. I'm going to go to Lagarif. Xvid is my other really popular one as well, but that's more for final output when I know I'm not going to do anything else to it, more like to send it to somebody for review and to sign off on it. Lagarif is what I use when I still work with it, or I just want to get better quality when I even later composite it, because that's also working with it, right? If I combine it with a bunch of others inside a video editing tool like Power Director, you will see that it's better to have a lossless version of the AVI file until you do your final render into, I don't know, Windows Movie, WMV, MP4, whatever format you like. So that's the step to save it out to AVI. Another thing you could do is save it out as a sequence, and that's obviously also a really popular and a good way to do it if you want to work perhaps only with a portion of the images. Right. For instance, you may say, well, there's too much of this where there is no explosion yet, so you may want to actually ignore some of the frames at the beginning, some of the leading frames. And then another thing you might want to do is actually do a motion motion estimated interpolation. All right, so let's say, for instance, I'm going to make this a little bit shorter here. I'm going to go and select the in marker, go to about this point for the out marker, and delete, right click on this selection and delete this block. So we now have a slightly shorter animation, and I say, well, I want it actually longer. I want that to go a little bit longer, 2-3 times longer. So what you could do is go to the filter animated motion prediction module. This one will run great if you have multiple cores on your CPU. We support up to 64 cores at this stage, and make sure you click dry run. Don't need the scan for dropped frames. Let's give that a try. 376 frames will now be calculated out of the 127 or 128 we have initially. And you do notice when there are sudden quick changes, there are some distortion effects. There are some limitations in the motion prediction module. Let's pay that attention. Let's take a look at it again. When the flare happens, look what happens in the planet area here. Some strange swimming effects. Boom, right there. See that ghosting? But guess what? That actually looks really cool, because when you have such a cataclysmic effect here, no wonder your retina is in pain. Right? No wonder you're starting to see double vision or some weird things. So I'm going to say that's actually cool. Let's keep that. And let's go unset the dry run. I don't need to waste any more time here. I mean, you could try a few other things. But this is good and smooth enough. Let's go and render that. Now we have 376 frames. Should be still fittable in memory, shouldn't run out of memory or anything like that. So at this point, we have an animation that is, about, what's that, 12 seconds long. So let's close this. And the last frame, by the way, the first frame that you see after the motion prediction module has completed, the first frame is a copy of the last frame. Right? That's not a glitch or a bug, it's just a feature. You paid for it. No. What I'm saying is that that's what it is. So go to that first frame and delete it, because it will otherwise do a strange jump. But now you do have this nice little animation. And again, there's this really interesting very sudden animation or effects. You see some ghosting here. That's where it's just moving too fast for the motion prediction module to really understand how to interpolate. It's good, but it's not perfect in all scenarios. But here you got a really nice little animation, and I'm gonna call this the demo of today. Thanks for watching, and thanks for waffling and howling, and we'll talk to you soon.